Her voice was shaking, but the mafia boss heard it and silenced the room with a look. The fluorescent lights of the 44th floor flickered, a high-pitched hum that felt like it was drilling directly into Lana Hayes' temples. It was 7:45 in the evening, and the offices of Kensingcroft Consulting were a graveyard of beige cubicles. Lana was, as usual, the last one left in her section. She was exhausted. It was a bone-deep weariness that had nothing to do with lack of sleep and everything to do with being invisible. Lana was a ghost in a navy blue blazer. She made coffee she never drank, booked conference rooms for meetings she was never invited to, and absorbed the ambient, low-grade harassment from her direct supervisor, Mark, like a sponge. He had a way of standing too close, of letting his hand rest on the back of her chair, his knuckles brushing her shoulder. He'd look at her mouth when she spoke, a slick, proprietary smile that made her want to scrub her skin raw, but she endured. She endured because her sister, Mia, was in her junior year in Oregon, and the tuition payments were relentless. Lana's minimum wage salary, stretched thin over a city that demanded blood for rent, was the only thing keeping Mia's future afloat. So Lana kept her head down, her voice quiet and her pain private. This city, this gritty, glittering trap, didn't care about justice. It only cared about what you could afford. Tonight. Mark had dumped a quarterly expense reconciliation on her desk at 5 o'clock, knowing it was a 2-hour job. "Need this before you clock out, sweetheart," he'd said, the word sweetheart a casual insult. "Big meeting in the morning." She finished at 8:10. The spreadsheets blurred. She rubbed her eyes, the grit under her lids protesting. All she wanted was her tiny, overpriced apartment and a locked door. She stood, stretching her aching back, and headed toward the executive kitchen at the end of the hall for a glass of water before the long subway ride home. The 44th floor was executive territory. The carpets were plusher. The air smelled faintly of cedar and old money. The main boardroom, the Olympus room as the junior staff called it, was dark, or it was supposed to be. As she passed, she saw a sliver of light from the heavy mahogany door. It was cracked open, and she heard voices. Not the drone of a presentation, but the low, sharp cadence of an argument. She slowed. She knew she should keep walking. It was none of her business, but she heard a voice she recognized. "Mr. Harrison, the firm's managing partner." His tone was strained. "Unacceptable risk. The channel is clean, I told you." A new voice, one she didn't recognize, cut through Harrison's anxiety like gravel. It was cold, measured, and carried an accent she couldn't place. Not foreign, just specific. Local, but from a part of the city she'd never seen. "Your channel is sloppy. My people don't like sloppy. You said this was a simple infrastructure deal." "It is," Harrison insisted. "The lobbying fees are just expedited." "You call laundering $500,000 through a dummy corp for Senator Graves' expedited lobbying," the cold voice countered. "That's not what we agreed to." Lana froze. Her blood turned to ice water. Senator Graves. Laundering. She'd seen the senator's face on billboards, promising to clean up the city. This wasn't just corporate fraud. This was something else. Something dark and deep. "Look," Harrison said, his voice dropping, "we need your muscle to secure the zoning vote. The senator delivers the vote, we deliver the zoning. Your syndicate gets its port access. Everyone wins. This is just paperwork." "My muscle," the man repeated, the words tasting like contempt, "is not for cleaning up your white-collar mess. Get it handled." Lana realized she was standing in the sliver of light from the hallway. She'd been there too long. She tried to step back, but her elbow clipped the metal frame of a water cooler beside the wall. She didn't knock it over, but her sleeve made a sharp zip against the steel. Inside the boardroom, the voices stopped. Absolute silence. Terror seized her. Lana turned and ran. She didn't wait for the water. She fled back to her cubicle, grabbed her coat and her worn bag, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hit the elevator button. She didn't log off her computer. She just ran. The sound of that sudden, terrible silence chasing her all the way down to the street. She didn't sleep. She sat on her sofa, The city lights painting her walls, replaying the conversation. Laundering, syndicate, port access. She was a mouse who had just seen the owls mapping out the field. By morning, the terror had curdled into a sick, frantic righteousness. She couldn't just know this. These men were corrupt. They were using the company. She had to tell someone. She was naive, maybe, but she still believed, deep down, that there was a right way. She put on the same navy blazer, pulled her hair back tight, and walked into the office like a woman heading to her own execution. She requested 5 minutes at the 9:30 status meeting, emailing Harrison's assistant that she had identified an urgent operational risk. She was granted 3 minutes. Lana walked into the conference room. It was the smaller one, but it was still full. 20 suits. Harrison sat at the head of the table, looking impatient. Mark was there, leaning back in his chair, smirking at her, as if wondering what nonsense she was about to spout, and at the far end of the table, seated slightly apart from the others, was a man she had never seen before, and he wasn't in a suit. He wore a crisp, black dress shirt, tailored so perfectly it looked molded to him, and dark pants. His watch was simple, platinum, and probably worth more than her apartment. He was dark, his black hair cut short, his jaw severe. He looked bored, his eyes half-lidded as he stared at the wood grain of the table. He was Harrison's guest. Lana recognized his voice instantly. The cold gravel from the boardroom, the man who had mentioned the syndicate. She faltered. Her planned speech evaporated. "Miss Hayes," Harrison prompted, his irritation clear. "You have the floor." Lana gripped the edge of the podium. Her palms were wet. "Mr. Harrison," she began, and was horrified to hear her own voice come out thin and reedy. I was here late last night, working on the expense reports," Mark scoffed. "And?" She ignored him, looking only at Harrison. "I was passing the Olympus room. The door was open. I overheard a conversation." The atmosphere in the room shifted. It went from bored to tense. "I heard things." She pushed on, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Things about illegal payments, about Senator Graves, and about laundering." Dead silence. Harrison's face didn't change, but his eyes went flat, cold. Mark, however, burst out laughing. It was a short, barking sound. "Laundering. Lana, are you writing a movie script? What, did you watch a gangster movie before bed?" Another executive, one of Mark's friends, chimed in. "Maybe she thinks infrastructure is code for something exciting. She's an admin. Harrison, she probably misheard." "I know what I heard," Lana insisted. But the words were wobbling. The room was closing in. They were all looking at her, not as a person but as an annoyance, a squeaking wheel. "I heard Shell Corp and Port Access and—" Her voice cracked. It snapped, high and thin, betraying the terror underneath. The humiliation was immediate and overwhelming. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and sharp. The laughter started then. It wasn't loud, just a wave of condescending chuckles. The men around the table looked at each other, smiling, dismissing her. The ghost was trying to speak, and it was pathetic. "She sounds pretty broken up about it." Someone snickered. Lana flushed a deep, painful crimson. She wanted to evaporate. Harrison leaned forward. His voice was quiet, but it was a death sentence. "Miss Hayes, this firm values loyalty. What it does not tolerate are baseless, hysterical accusations against its senior partners or its clients." He glanced at the man in black. "Your performance has been under review for some time. Perhaps the stress of this environment is simply too much for you. Consider this your final warning. You are dismissed. Get out." She was frozen, fired, humiliated. She was going to be sick. The room was still settling, the last of the quiet laughter dying down. Then, a new sound. The light scrape of a chair leg on the floor. The man at the end of the table, Dante Morelli. He hadn't moved. He hadn't looked up. But now, he did. He lifted his head, and his eyes, jet black, completely unreadable, swept the room. They didn't linger on Harrison. They passed over Mark like he was furniture. They landed on Lana. His presence suddenly filled the room, sucking all the air out. The humidity of their mockery vanished, replaced by a dry, absolute cold. He leaned forward, just an inch. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. It wasn't a shout. It was a blade. She finishes. Now. It was not a request. It was an order. The room didn't just go quiet. It went still. The snickering died instantly. Mark's smile froze and slid off his face. Harrison, the man who ran this floor, actually looked startled, his corporate mask slipping to show the anxious man from last night. "Mr. Morelli," Harrison began, trying to regain control. "This is a simple internal staffing matter. It doesn't concern you." Dante didn't look at Harrison. His gaze remained locked on Lana. It was heavy. It wasn't kind. It wasn't gentle. It was focused. He was seeing her. For the first time in her life, Lana felt truly, terribly seen. "Go on," he said. His voice softer now, meant only for her. Lana stared at him. This man, this stranger, who was part of the very crime she was trying to report, was the only one in the room who had given her the courtesy of her own voice. But she couldn't. The moment was broken. The words were gone. "I have nothing else," she whispered, her voice still trembling, but not broken. "Excuse me." She turned and walked out of the room. Her legs felt like hollow tubes, but she did not run. She walked. The silence that followed her down the hall was absolute, and far more terrifying than the laughter had been. She made it to the lobby, past the gleaming security desks, and burst through the revolving doors onto the street. The city noise, the horns, the sirens, the rumble of buses, hit her like a physical blow. She stumbled to the side of the building, fumbling in her bag for her phone, gasping for air. She was fired. She was going to lose her apartment. Mia was going to have to drop out. She was hyperventilating, her fingers slipping on the screen as she tried to call her sister. Mia wouldn't know what to do, but Lana just needed to hear her voice. "Mia, pick up. Please pick up." A shadow fell over her. Lana flinched, shrinking back against the granite wall, expecting Mark or a security guard to drag her off the property. It was him, Dante Morelli. He was standing on the sidewalk, somehow separate from the river of pedestrians flowing around him. A black town car, the kind that cost more than her annual salary, idled at the curb. "They fired you," he stated. It wasn't a question. They threatened to," Lana corrected, her voice still breathy with panic. She was still trying to dial, her thumb missing the icon. "You're shaking." "I'm fine," she lied. I need to make a call." "You're not fine. You're calling your sister, Mia. She's a junior at the University of Oregon, studies graphic design." Lana's blood didn't just run cold. It stopped. She looked up at him, her panic eclipsed by a new, sharper terror. How do you know that?" "I make it a point to know who is in a room with me," he said simply. "Get in the car." "No." The word was automatic. "No, thank you. I'm taking the subway." He looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her trembling hands, her pale face. "You look like you're going to pass out on the platform and fall onto the tracks. Get in. I'm not asking again." He wasn't threatening her. He was just stating a fact. He reached past her and opened the heavy back door of the town car. Lana looked at the subway entrance 2 blocks away. The thought of the crushing crowd, the screech of the brakes, the hot, stale air underground. She couldn't. She would collapse. She looked back at him. He was a monster, she knew it. But he was the only person who had stopped the laughing. She got in the car, the door shut with a heavy, expensive thud. The city noise was gone, replaced by a pressurized silence that was almost as loud. The car smelled like rich leather and something clean and metallic, like ozone. "Where do you live?" he asked, not looking at her. She gave him the address, her voice small, a run-down brick building in a neighborhood that was still 20 years from gentrification. He recited the address to the driver through an intercom she couldn't see. The car pulled smoothly into the thicket of midday traffic. He didn't speak. He just sat, staring out the window, his profile sharp against the passing buildings. His presence was immense. He took up all the air in the car, and Lana found herself breathing shallowly, afraid to disturb him. "Thank you," she finally whispered, staring at her own lap. "In the meeting, for that..." He turned his head slowly. His eyes assessed her. "They're pigs," he said, his voice flat. "But you're a fool." Lana's head snapped up. "What? You heard what they said last night. You knew who Harrison was. You knew I was there. And you walked into that room anyway, armed with nothing but your nerves. That's not brave. It's stupid." The accusation stung more than the laughter had. Tears, hot and angry this time, welled in her eyes. "I didn't know what else to do," she shot back, her voice rising. "I didn't know you'd be there. I thought it was the right thing. I didn't mean to get involved. I didn't ask for any of this." The confession, raw and desperate, hung in the air between them. He watched her, a flicker of something unreadable in his dark eyes. It wasn't pity. It was intrigue. He was looking at her like a scientist studying a creature he had never encountered before. This raw, misplaced honesty. It was so out of place in his world, so dangerously naive, that it fascinated him. "No," he said at last, turning to look back out the window. "You didn't." The rest of the 20-minute ride was spent in that crushing silence. He was a statue carved from granite. She was a bundle of raw, vibrating nerves. The car glided to a stop in front of her building. The driver didn't get out. "Don't go back there," Dante said. "To work? I'm fired. I can't." "They didn't fire you," he corrected her. "They warned you. They left you employed so they can watch you. Now I'm warning you. Stay away. Forget what you heard. Forget my name. Forget Harrison. Okay," she whispered. She fumbled for the door handle and scrambled out of the car, desperate for the dirty city air. "Thank you for the ride." He just nodded once, his expression unreadable. The tinted window slid up, and the black car merged with the traffic, disappearing as if it had never been. Lana ran inside, her keys shaking. She triple-locked her apartment door, leaning against it, her heart pounding. Her apartment was small, furnished with second-hand finds and Mia's old art projects. It was her only sanctuary. She collapsed onto the sofa, and the adrenaline crash hit her. She cried. She cried for her job, for her sister, for her own monumental stupidity. She cried for the humiliation. Hours passed. Night fell. She showered, the hot water doing nothing to warm the chill in her bones. She put on her oldest sweats and sat in the dark, watching the headlights of passing cars paint her walls. The city sounded different now. Every siren, every distant shout felt personal. At 10:30, she heard it, a soft scraping sound at her front door. She went rigid. Silence. She held her breath, creeping off the couch. She moved silently to the door, her eye pressing against the peephole. The hallway was empty. The dim, yellow light was undisturbed, but she saw it. On her worn-out welcome mat, a plain white envelope. She waited. 1 minute. 5. Her heart felt like it was trying to escape her chest. Finally. Her hand shaking. She undid the 3 locks and snatched the envelope inside, slamming and relocking the door in one motion. It was heavy. Not thick, but heavy. She turned it over. No name. No address. Her fingers trembled as she tore open the flap. Inside was a stack of cash. $100 bills. She riffled through them. It was a lot. Maybe 4. Maybe $5,000. And beneath the cash, a single piece of heavy cardstock. There was one sentence, written in strong, black script. "For protection. You'll need it." It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. The money wasn't a gift. The note wasn't a comfort. It was a statement. This wasn't over. The game had started, and she was the prize. Lana sank to the floor, the money clutched in her hand, and for the first time that day, she felt true, undiluted terror. The $5,000 felt like an anchor in her bag, heavy, dirty, and terrifying. Lana hadn't slept. She had sat on her kitchen floor, the white envelope on the linoleum in front of her, until the gray, polluted light of dawn filtered through her small window. Dante Morelli's warning echoed in her head. Don't go back there. They left you employed so they can watch you. But what else could she do? Not going back was admitting defeat. It was letting them win. It was accepting that her life was now dictated by a man who slid cash under her door. She had to believe he was wrong. She had to believe that Harrison's threat was just corporate bluster, that the meeting yesterday was the end of it. She would go in, sit at her desk, and be invisible again. The money in her bag was just a mistake, a scare tactic. She dressed in the same navy blazer. It felt like armor, but it was just cheap polyester. She put the envelope of cash in the bottom of her closet, hidden under a stack of old towels, and left. The morning air was damp, promising rain. The subway ride was a blur of anonymous, tired faces. She felt separate from them, as if she were already a ghost. When she walked into the soaring, marble and glass lobby of Kensingcroft, her heart was a cold stone in her chest. She walked to the security turnstiles. She held her plastic ID badge over the sensor. The light flashed red. A short, electronic buzz. Access denied. She tried again. Red. Access denied. A security guard, a man she'd smiled at every morning for 2 years, looked up from his screen. His face was carefully blank. Miss Hayes, right? Yes, Lana said, her voice tight. My badge isn't working. Right, the guard said, not meeting her eyes. We received a notification this morning. Ma'am, your access has been revoked. I'm afraid you need to contact Human Resources. Revoked, but... Mr. Harrison just warned me yesterday. He didn't fire me. The guard shrugged. A small, uncomfortable movement. All I know is what's on the screen. Ma'am, you're not permitted on the premises. He wasn't going to help. He was paid to keep her out. She was no longer an employee. She was a problem. The humiliation from yesterday was nothing compared to this. This was a public execution. She could feel the eyes of the other junior staffers on her back as they swiped their green-lit badges and walked through. She turned, her face burning, and walked back out the revolving doors. Dante was right. They hadn't fired her to watch her. They had fired her to erase her. The rain started on the subway ride home, a cold, miserable November drizzle. She walked the 3 blocks from the station, pulling her thin blazer tighter, but the rain soaked through, chilling her to the bone. She just wanted to get inside, lock her door, and figure out how to call her sister, how to explain that Mia's tuition was gone. She climbed the stairs to her 3rd-floor apartment, her head down, fumbling for her keys. She reached her door, number 3B. She stopped. The door was open, just a crack. The deadbolt, the one she had triple locked last night, was splintered. The wood of the door jamb was hanging in shards. No, she whispered. The word was empty. She pushed the door open. Her life had been turned inside out. It wasn't a robbery. It was a violation. Her secondhand sofa was slashed, the cheap stuffing pulled out and thrown across the floor. The small television was shattered. Her kitchen cabinets were open, their contents, flour, pasta, a few cans of soup, crushed and smeared on the linoleum. But it was the bedroom that made her sick. They had gone through her things. Her clothes were pulled from her dresser, her mattress flipped over, and on the floor, in the middle of the mess, was a framed photo of her and Mia, smiling at Mia's high school graduation. The glass was shattered, the photo itself left untouched, face up. It was a message. We know who you are. We know what you care about. Her laptop was gone. The old shoebox where she kept her important papers, her birth certificate, her parents' death certificates, was gone. They hadn't taken the cash. She ran to the closet, her heart pounding, and dug under the towels. The envelope was still there. They didn't want money. They wanted leverage. They wanted her to know they could get to her. They could get to Mia. She backed away from the closet, shaking, and slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor. Her breath was coming in short, sharp gasps. This was real. This was happening. She grabbed her phone, her fingers slipping on the screen. She dialed 911. Police, fire, or ambulance. The voice was bored. Police, my apartment. It's been broken into. They destroyed everything. Are you in danger now, miss? Is the perpetrator still there? No, Lana whispered, looking at the slashed sofa. No, I'm alone. Okay, we'll dispatch a car when one is available. "What's the address?" She gave the address. The operator clicked off. Lana waited. She didn't move from the floor. She just sat there, in her ruined apartment, dripping wet, staring at the broken frame of her sister. The rain lashed against the window. 1 hour passed. The sirens in the distance faded, always going somewhere else. 2 hours. The sky grew darker. The apartment was cold. They weren't coming. Of course they weren't coming. The same people who could launder $500,000 for a senator, the same people who could deactivate her badge with a single phone call, could certainly ensure one frantic 911 call from a nobody was lost in the system. She was alone, utterly, completely, and dangerously alone. She had no job, no home, no police. Her only family was a target. She thought of the man in the black shirt, the man with the cold, assessing eyes who had seen this coming. For protection, you'll need it. He was the only one who had listened. He was the only one who had told her the truth. He was a monster. She knew it. Part of this. But he was the only person in the city who had offered her a hand, even if it was just to give her a ride home. Her desperation was a physical thing, a cold knot of nausea in her stomach. She grabbed her bag. She stuffed the envelope of cash into it. She put on her only other coat, a worn wool one, and walked out of the ruined apartment, leaving the door hanging open. She had no idea where to find him. Dante Morelli. The name wasn't in any phone book. She stood on the wet sidewalk, the rain plastering her hair to her face, and pulled out her phone. She searched the name. News articles, society pages, vague mentions, but one name kept appearing alongside his in business registries for holdings, companies she didn't understand, a nightclub downtown in the warehouse district. Il Corvo. She hailed a cab, the yellow paint a splash of bright denial in the gray afternoon. She gave the driver the address, her voice shaking so badly he had to ask her to repeat it. She paid him with one of the $100 bills, and he gave her a strange look as he handed back the change. The club was a black, windowless building, an old warehouse converted into a fortress of velvet ropes and dark steel. It was only 4 p.m, and it was clearly not open. But there were men. 2 of them, in expensive black suits that the rain beaded on, stood by the massive, unmarked steel door. They were built like refrigerators, and their faces were hard and impassive. Lana, soaked to the skin, her hair in rat's tails, her face pale with terror, must have looked like a lunatic. She walked up to them. I need to see Mr. Morelli," she said. The larger of the 2 men didn't even look at her. He stared at the street. "Private club. We're closed." "Please," she begged, the tears she'd been holding back finally starting to spill, hot and useless in the cold rain. It's an emergency, please. Just tell him Lana Hayes is here, from Kensingcroft." The second man, the one with a scar on his jaw, almost smiled. "Kensingcroft? You lost little girl? Beat it. The boss ain't seeing nobody." He put a heavy hand on her shoulder to shove her back. "Don't touch me," she cried, flinching away, the desperation making her bold. "He knows me. He gave me a ride yesterday. He'll be angry if you don't tell him I'm here. Please." The men exchanged a look. The scar-jawed one was about to say something else, something final and unkind, when the steel door behind them opened with a heavy, soundless click. Dante Morelli stood in the doorway. He was in the same dark, perfect clothes. He looked at his men, then at Lana. He took in her drenched coat, her red-rimmed eyes, the way she was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. His expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened into black ice. "Santo," he said, his voice quiet, but it made the scar-jawed man flinch. "Was your hand on her?" "Boss, she just showed up." "Let her in," Dante said, cutting him off. He stepped back into the darkness. "Now." The 2 men moved aside instantly. Lana hurried past them, stumbling into the warm, dark interior. The club was silent, smelling of stale whiskey, cigar smoke, and industrial cleaning solution. Dante led her wordlessly through the main room, past empty tables and an onyx bar, to a door at the back. He opened it, revealing a small, private lounge. It was all dark wood, deep leather armchairs, and a single desk, It was intensely masculine and utterly quiet. "Sit," he commanded. She sank into one of the armchairs. It was so deep she felt like she was drowning in it. She was shaking too hard to speak. He disappeared for a moment and returned with a thick, clean bar towel. He tossed it at her. "Dry your face." He went to a small sideboard, poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a heavy crystal glass, and pushed it across the desk toward her. "Drink it." "I don't—" "Drink it," he repeated. She picked it up. Her hands were shaking so badly the liquid sloshed. She took a sip. It was brandy, and it burned all the way down, a fire in her frozen chest. He sat in the chair opposite her, leaning forward, his forearms on his knees. He just watched her. He waited. The silence, the warmth, and the brandy finally broke her. "You were right," she whispered. And then the sobs came. Huge, tearing gasps that ripped out of her. She told him everything. The red light at the turnstile, the security guard's empty eyes, the splintered door, the slashed sofa, the shattered picture of Mia, the laptop, gone. "I called the police," she choked out, wiping her face with the towel. "They never came. They're not coming. They left the money. They left it. They wanted me to know." She looked up at him, her eyes raw. "They know about Mia. They know she's all I have. They're going to hurt her, aren't they? To shut me up?" Dante listened. His face was a mask of cold control. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't say, "It will be okay." He simply absorbed her story, his gaze analytical. When she was finished, just exhausted, hiccuping sobs in the silence of the room, he finally spoke. "Yes," he said, "they would. They won't stop. You saw their books. You threatened a senator. You're not an operational risk. Lana, you're a witness, and Kenz and Croft don't leave witnesses. So what do I do?" she whispered. "I have nowhere to go. I can't go back there." He stood up. The decision was already made. "You're in it now. So you stay with me until I say it's safe." She stared at him. "Stay with you? Here?" A flicker of something, amusement maybe, crossed his face. "No, not here." He motioned for her to stand. "Come on." She was hesitant. This man was part of that world, the world of syndicates and laundering. I don't know." "Do you have another option?" he asked, his voice flat. "Go back to your apartment. Wait for them to return. Call the police who won't come. You have nowhere else to go. You said it yourself." He was right. She was terrified of him, but she was more terrified of the men who had been in her home. She stood up, her legs unsteady. He led her out a back exit to a private underground garage. He didn't open the door of a town car. He opened the passenger door of a sleek, black Maserati that looked more like a weapon than a car. The drive was silent. He navigated the city with an aggressive, focused grace. They didn't go to a neighborhood she recognized. They pulled into a glass and steel skyscraper, a monument of new money and anonymity, driving down into a private garage that required a key fob and a thumbprint. They rode a silent, high-speed elevator, and it opened directly into his apartment, the penthouse. Lana stepped out and stopped. The entire apartment was walled in glass, a 360-degree view of the city, which was now glittering with lights as the rainy night fell. The floors were black marble. The furniture was minimalist, black leather and chrome. It was vast, beautiful, and as cold and empty as a museum. There was not a single photograph, not a book out of place. "You live here alone?" she asked, her voice hushed. "I don't like company," he replied. He walked past her, shrugging off his jacket and tossing it on a chair. He led her down a hallway. "This is the guest room. The bathroom is through there. Take a shower, you're still shaking." He left. The guest room was as impersonal as the rest of it, but the bathroom was stocked with expensive, sealed soaps and thick towels. She showered, the hot water stinging her cold skin, and washed the day away. When she stepped out, wrapped in a towel, she realized her clothes were still damp and dirty. She opened the bathroom door a crack. "Mr. Morelli?" He was in the hallway, leaning against the wall opposite her door, arms crossed, as if he'd been waiting. My clothes, they're wet." He didn't say anything. He just pushed off the wall and went into a room further down the hall. He returned a moment later and held out a piece of clothing. It was a plain, black cotton t-shirt. "It's all I have that will fit," he said. She took it. His fingers brushed hers. They were warm. "Thank you." She shut the door and changed. The shirt was huge, falling to her mid-thighs, the sleeves covering her hands. It smelled like him, not cologne, but something clean and sharp, like expensive soap and ozone. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, and opened the door. He was still there, in the hallway, leaning against the wall, his gaze dropped, sweeping over her. He saw her bare legs, the way the soft cotton clung to her shoulders, the way she was hugging herself, her arms crossed over her chest. He saw the fragility. He saw the goosebumps on her skin, but he also saw the defiance in her chin, the way she met his gaze, refusing to look away. She was faking being strong, and she was failing badly. But she was trying. He was undeniably drawn to it, this broken, stubborn thing that had washed up on his doorstep. She couldn't sleep. The guest bed was soft, but her mind was racing. After an hour, she gave up. She padded silently out into the main living area. He was there, standing in front of the massive wall of glass, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand, staring down at the city lights. He hadn't planned on sleeping either. He heard her and turned. "You should rest," he said. "I can't," she whispered. She walked to the window, standing a few feet away from him. The city looked like a carpet of fallen stars. "They're still out there. Harrison, his men. They are?" She shivered, rubbing her arms. "Thank you for getting me out of there." He stepped closer. The city lights illuminated the sharp planes of his face. He was close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, a stark contrast to the cold glass. She flinched when he lifted his hand. He stopped, his hand hovering in the air between them. Then, slowly, deliberately, so she could see his intention. He touched her cheek. His thumb was rough, a working man's thumb, and it brushed away a tear she hadn't even known had fallen. His eyes were black, intense, holding hers captive. "They want to silence you," he said, his voice a low, fierce rumble that seemed to vibrate through her. "If they want to silence you, they'll have to go through me." The intensity of his gaze was too much. It felt more intimate than a kiss. She trembled, but not from the cold. "Go to bed, Lana," he said, his voice softer. She looked at the dark hallway leading to the guest room, then back at him. "Your room," she said, the request so quiet he barely heard it. "Can I? I'd feel safer if you're close." He understood. It wasn't a proposition. It was the request of someone terrified of the dark. He nodded once. He led her to his master bedroom. It was even more stark than the rest of the penthouse. Just a massive bed, a dresser, and more glass. He pulled back the heavy, gray duvet. She climbed in, the sheets cool against her skin. The bed dwarfed her. He turned to leave. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice small. "The couch." He walked out, leaving the door open a few inches, a sliver of light from the hallway cutting into the darkness. Lana lay in his bed, drowning in the faint scent of him, staring at that sliver of light, listening to the sound of a man she didn't know settling onto a cold leather couch in the next room. Neither of them slept. Lana woke with a jolt, her heart hammering against her ribs, the ghost of a scream on her lips. She was on the guest room bed, but she had fallen asleep on the couch in Dante's living room. He must have carried her. The thought sent a strange, unwelcome flush through her. The penthouse was silent, the morning light a pale, sterile gray against the black marble. She padded out, still in his t-shirt, her bare feet cold on the floor. He was in the main room, already dressed in dark pants and a gray, perfectly tailored shirt. He was standing by the window, a cup of coffee in his hand, watching a large, flat-screen television mounted on the wall. It was muted, but the chyron at the bottom of the local news broadcast told the story. Tragic overnight accident, Kensingcroft accountant, dead in fiery crash. Lana's blood froze. She walked closer, her eyes fixed on the screen. The footage showed a mangled, blackened car being pulled from a ravine. The photo they showed was of a smiling, painfully young man in a cheap suit, David Chen. "Oh, God," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "David." Dante turned his head, his dark eyes watching her, gauging her reaction. "I knew him," she said, her voice shaking. I spoke to him just a few days ago in the break room. He was nice. He was always nervous. He asked me if I thought Mark was okay. He said the numbers on the fourth quarter projections looked creative." She looked from the burning car back to Dante, her stomach clenching with a terrible, cold sickness. "That wasn't an accident." "No," Dante said, his voice flat. He took a sip of his coffee. "It wasn't. It was a message. To you, and to anyone else at Kensingcroft who might feel a sudden urge to talk." He clicked the television off, plunging the room into a heavy silence. "They're cleaning up," he said. He set his cup down and walked to his study, leaving her alone in the massive room. She could hear the low, sharp cadence of his voice as he made a call, the words indistinguishable, but the tone lethal. Lana sank onto the leather couch, wrapping her arms around her knees. David Chen was dead. He was dead because he'd noticed creative numbers. She had stood in a boardroom and accused the partners of laundering money. She hadn't just been stupid. She had signed her own death warrant, and David's. She spent the day in a haze of fear and guilt. The penthouse, which had felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a cage, a beautiful, sterile prison suspended 1,000 feet above the city. She was trapped. Dante was a ghost, busy in his study. Men in sharp suits came and went, their hard faces betraying nothing as they entered the private elevator. They never looked at her. She was just a piece of furniture in the boss's apartment. Late in the afternoon, the man with the scar on his jaw, Santo, arrived. He went into the study, and this time, the door was left slightly ajar. Lana didn't mean to listen, but Dante's voice carried, "They're not street muscle, boss," Santo was saying. "The firm has a private security contract, a group called Aegis Tactical." "I've heard of them." Dante's voice was grim, ex-military, deniable. "Worse," Santo said. "They're ex-Delta and SS. Most of them, they did corporate resolution work in South America for oil companies, made union organizers disappear. Now they're stateside. They're clean, untraceable, and they are very, very good. The accountant wasn't a warning. It was a termination. Professional. No loose ends. And Lana? She's the last loose end," Santo stated. "Aegis will be watching her old apartment, her sister, her old roots. They'll be hunting." Lana pressed her back against the wall, her blood running cold. Hunting. They weren't just trying to scare her. They were actively trying to kill her. The study door opened and Santo walked out. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable, and left. A few minutes later, Dante emerged. He had put on a dark suit jacket. He looked at her, sitting pale and small on his enormous couch. "You heard," he said. She nodded, unable to speak. He walked over and stood in front of her. "I'm telling you this once. Lana, these are not the men you saw in that boardroom. They're not Harrison. They are professionals. They will not threaten you. They will not warn you. They will find you, and they will put a bullet in your head. Do you understand me?" "Yes," she whispered. "So you will not leave this apartment." It was not a request. "My men are in the hall. The elevator has a biometric lock. You do not go near the service stairs. You do not use your phone to call anyone. You are here, and you are safe. Anywhere else, you are dead." He turned to leave. "Where are you going?" she asked, a note of panic in her voice. "I have business," he said, adjusting his cuff. "I'm finding out just how deep this Aegis group is in my city." He left. The heavy click of the elevator door sealing her in was the loudest sound she had ever heard. She was alone, and she was furious. She paced the apartment, a caged animal. She was not a prisoner. She would not be. He was protecting her. Yes, but he was also suffocating her. He was handling it. He and his men would take care of the problem. And what was she? The victim, the prize, the liability. No. She thought of David Chen. She thought of the fear in his eyes. She She thought of her sister. She had to do something, her laptop. When she'd fled her office after the disastrous meeting, she'd only grabbed her bag and coat. Her work-issued laptop was still sitting in its docking station at her desk. Her badge was deactivated. Her apartment was destroyed. But that laptop, it might still be there. If Harrison's IT department hadn't wiped it yet, it could have everything. Emails she'd saved to the hard drive, cached files, a list of server directories she'd accessed. It was her proof, her weapon. She couldn't just sit here and wait for Dante to save her. She had to save herself. His warning about the service stairs was the key. She hadn't even known they existed. She found the door. A plain, steel panel near the kitchen, hidden behind a modern art sculpture. It was, as he'd said, locked. But it was a simple, old-fashioned deadbolt, meant to keep staff from wandering, not to keep a prisoner in. She found a set of metal skewers in his pristine, unused kitchen. Her hands were shaking, but she was fueled by a reckless, desperate energy. It took her 20 minutes of terrible, scraping noise, but she managed to jimmy the lock. She grabbed her wool coat, the one she'd arrived in, and the wad of cash he'd given her. She slipped out the door and ran down the concrete stairs, her heart pounding with terror and a wild, exhilarating sense of freedom. She emerged in a sub-basement, slipped past a sleeping security guard, and was out on the street. The cab ride to the Kensincroft building was agony. Every car that followed them for more than a block, every face that glanced at her, felt like a threat. She couldn't get in the front lobby, but she knew the parking garage. The gate was slow. She waited in the alley across the street, her heart in her throat, until a black Mercedes slowed to enter. As the gate arm rose and the car descended, Lana sprinted across the street, squeezing through the gap just before it closed. She was in. The garage was cold, quiet, and smelled of gasoline and damp concrete. Her footsteps echoed. She knew her desk was on the 44th floor, but the employee elevators in the garage required a badge. She was an idiot. What was she thinking? She was about to turn back, to admit defeat, when she heard a car engine, not from the ramp, from somewhere on the level, a plain, black sedan, the kind that blends into any street, rolled around the concrete pillar, its headlights off. It stopped, blocking her path to the exit. Two men got out. They were not executives. They were not security guards. They wore neutral-colored windbreakers and blank expressions. They moved with a fluid, terrifying economy, fanning out to flank her. They were Aegis. Lana Hayes, the first man said. His voice was calm, almost pleasant. "You've been a hard person to find, mister. Harrison is very anxious to recover his property. Please come with us." He reached for her. Lana screamed and threw the only thing she had, her bag. It hit him in the chest, and she bolted, running between the parked cars. The second man was on her in an instant. He didn't grab her. He tackled her, his arm wrapping around her waist, a hand clamping over her mouth, cutting off her scream. He was brutally strong, and he smelled like nothing. No cologne, no sweat, just clean. Cold fabric. "Don't fight," the first man said, walking calmly toward her. "It will be much, much easier if you don't fight." He reached into his jacket, a black SUV, its engine roaring, squealed around the corner, its high beams flashing on, blinding them. It slammed to a stop, and Santo was out before the engine was off, another man she didn't know at his side. The man holding Lana shoved her away, drawing a weapon, but Santo was on him. It was not a fight. It was a professional disassembly. It was fast, brutal, and horrifyingly quiet. Santo moved with a speed that defied his size, and the sound of his fist connecting with the Aegis man's jaw was a sickening, wet crack. The man crumpled. The first man raised his hands, his expression one of professional annoyance, not fear. "This is not your business," he said. Santo's partner slammed the man's head against a concrete pillar. He slid to the ground, unconscious. Lana was on her hands and knees, hyperventilating. Santo grabbed her by the upper arm, his fingers digging in like a vice, and hauled her to her feet. His face was pale with fury. "You stupid, stupid girl," he snarled, and he shoved her into the back of the SUV. The boss is going to have my head, and then he is going to have yours. The ride back was the longest 10 minutes of her life. Santo drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. Lana sat in the back, trembling, the adrenaline draining away, leaving only a cold, hollow terror. When the private elevator opened into the penthouse, Dante was standing there. He wasn't moving. He was just standing in the middle of the room, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled up. He looked like a statue carved from thunderclouds. The cold, controlled anger he'd shown before was gone. This was a white-hot, silent rage that vibrated in the air. "Leave us," he said to Santo. Santo didn't hesitate. He nodded and was gone, the elevator door closing, sealing her inside with the storm. "Do you have any idea," he began, his voice dangerously low, "what you just did? I had to," she whispered, backing away as he advanced on her. "You had to?" He scoffed. A short, violent sound. "You had to walk into the one place on earth they knew you would go? They were waiting for you. Lana, they were waiting for you to do something stupid, and you did not disappoint." "I can't just be your prisoner," she shouted, her fear and guilt twisting into defiance. She backed up until she hit the cold glass wall. The city lights blazed 1,000 feet below, a beautiful, indifferent witness. "You don't get to lock me in here. It's my life they're trying to take. I had to get my laptop. I had to do something." "Your laptop," he repeated, his voice laced with contempt. He was on her now, crowding her, his hands planting on the glass on either side of her head. He was so close she could feel the furnace heat of his body, see the black fury in his eyes. "You think a laptop matters, he roared, his control finally snapping. "They killed a man this morning. They were sent to kill you, and you, in your stupid, misplaced pride, walked right into their hands. You stay where I can protect you." His chest was heaving. He was nose to nose with her, his anger a tangible thing, a wall of heat and power. And just like that, the anger broke. It didn't fade. It shattered. And underneath it was something else, something raw and unguarded, fear. He had been terrified, not for his operation, not for his men, for her. The realization hit them both at the same moment. The silence that fell was deafening, thick, and charged with an energy that had nothing to do with anger. His gaze dropped from her eyes to her mouth. She was breathing hard, her lips parted. He was breathing just as hard. "You want me to stop caring?" he growled, his voice dropping to a rough whisper that shivered down her spine. Too late. His right hand moved from the glass, his fingers tangling in her hair, cupping the back of her head, holding her still. His left hand slid to her jaw, his thumb stroking the soft skin just below her ear. He tilted her head up. He kissed her. It was not gentle. It was a collision. It was raw and desperate and demanding. It was the taste of his anger, his fear, and a possessiveness that staked a claim. It was the release of every bit of tension that had been building between them since she first heard his voice in that boardroom. A shock went through Lana, so potent it made her knees weak, and it wasn't fear. It was want, a sudden, drowning wave of it. This man, this dangerous, cold, terrifying man, was looking at her like she was the only thing in the room, the only thing in the world. Her hands, which had been flat against his chest, fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer. She kissed him back, meeting his intensity, her desperation a match for his. The kiss deepened, his mouth moving over hers, and she trembled. It was too much. The power, the heat, the raw emotion, it was overwhelming. She broke the kiss, pushing weakly at his chest, a small, choked sound in her throat. I can't. Dante didn't try to kiss her again. He let her go, but his hands lingered, one on her jaw, one in her hair. He rested his forehead against hers, his own breath ragged. His eyes were closed. He looked, for just 1 second, as overwhelmed as she felt. Then he pulled back, the connection broken. The cold air of the penthouse rushed between them. "Go to your room," he said, his voice rough. He turned his back to her, running a hand through his hair. "Just go." She fled. She locked herself in the guest bathroom, her heart pounding, her lips tingling and bruised. That night, sleep was impossible. She was in the guest bed, wearing his shirt, the scent of him all around her. The kiss played over and over in her mind. She heard a sound. She sat up. His shadow fell across the sliver of light from the open door. He was standing in the hallway, just as he had the night before, watching her. But tonight was different. She wasn't scared of the men outside. She wasn't scared of him. She sat up fully, the sheet pooling around her waist. He didn't move. Lana held out her hand, a small, trembling, certain gesture, an invitation. He stood in the doorway for a long, silent beat. Then he walked in. He didn't turn on the light. He just walked to the far side of the bed, his back to her, and stood by the window, looking out at the city. "You should sleep," he said, his voice quiet. "I can't," she whispered. "Neither can you." He didn't answer. The tension from the kiss was still between them, a heavy, unspoken thing. She moved, sitting up on her knees, and crawled across the bed. She stopped behind him. She put her hand on his back. His muscles were steel cables under his shirt. He didn't flinch, but he didn't relax. She lay back down, her heart aching with a strange, unfamiliar loneliness. She tugged on the sleeve of his shirt. "Please," she whispered, Don't stand there. Please." He turned, his face an unreadable mask in the shadows. He sat on the edge of the bed, his back to her. She waited. Then, slowly, she lay down, and after a moment she rolled onto her side and rested her head on his shoulder. He went absolutely rigid. She held her breath, sure he would pull away, that she had crossed a line. Then, he let out a long, slow breath. The tension didn't leave him, but he shifted. He lay down on his back, on top of the covers, and she curled into his side, her arm across his chest, her head tucked under his chin. His arm came around her, holding her against him. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't tender. It was an embrace of pure possession. It was an anchor in the storm. He held her as if he were holding her back from a cliff edge, and he didn't say a word. Lana woke up in his bed, alone. She was disoriented for a long moment, the gray morning light of the guest room confusing her. Then she remembered. She had fallen asleep in his arms, on top of the covers of his bed, her head on his chest. He must have carried her here, just as he had from the couch. He had undressed her, leaving her in the black t-shirt, and tucked her into the guest bed. A gesture of almost painful gentleness that seemed impossible from the man who had herded her into the penthouse. She sat up, his scent clinging to the cotton, a faint, clean, sharp smell that was becoming dangerously familiar. The penthouse was silent, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was no longer the silence of an empty museum. It was the silence of a lion waiting. She padded into the living room. Dante was in his study. The door open, he was on the phone, his back to her, but his voice was a low, controlled vibration that commanded the entire space. "No, I don't care about the risk," he was saying. "You squeeze him until he pops. I want the port manifests from the last 6 months. Yes, all of them, and find out what else Harrison is moving through that channel." He listened. "Then you remind him what happens to partners who don't pay their insurance." He hung up without a goodbye and immediately made another call. Lana watched him. This was his world. Not just the quiet violence of men like Santo, but this, a complex web of influence, pressure, and favors that spiderwebbed through the city. He was leaning on councilmen, threatening shipping foremen, calling in debts from judges. He was pulling the strings of the city's underbelly to fight a war in its boardrooms. He turned, sensing her, and their eyes met. The memory of the previous night, the fight, the kiss, the desperate, silent way they had held each other, hung in the air between them. He didn't smile. His face remained hard, but the cold assessment was gone. He was just looking at her. "There's coffee," he said, gesturing with his chin toward the kitchen. That afternoon, Santo arrived. He wasn't alone. He was followed by a short, broad man in his late 50s, a man with a broken nose and the weary eyes of someone who had fought in the trenches of a different kind of war. He wore a stained windbreaker with a Port Workers Union logo stitched on the chest. He looked terrified, but also angry. "This is Fitz," Santo said, giving the man a light shove into the room. "Mr. Morelli," Fitz said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "I don't appreciate being dragged out of my office. And I don't appreciate my associates being denied access to public records," Dante replied, his voice deceptively mild. He was standing by the window, a picture of calm. "You've been uncooperative, Fitz, for a man who relies on my goodwill to keep his docks running smoothly." "Look," Fitz said, wringing his hands, "Harrison and his people. They're not like you. They're clean. They got lawyers, they got senators, and I have you," Dante said. "You've been taking their bribes for 2 years to look the other way on no-show contracts. I know it, they know it, and now I want what you have on them." Fitz stared at him. His bluff called. He was trapped between two predators. He visibly deflated. Reaching into his jacket pocket, he pulled out a small, silver digital audio recorder. "I keep insurance on," he muttered, throwing it on the marble coffee table. "Just in case. This was from a meeting 3 weeks ago, at the port. They got sloppy. Thought I was just a dumb dock boss." "Get him out," Dante said to Santo. Santo escorted the union man out. Dante picked up the recorder, weighing it in his hand. He looked at Lana, who was standing by the kitchen island, frozen. "You should hear this," he said. He pressed the play button. The audio was clear. Fitz's voice, then Harrison's. They were discussing zoning. Then a voice Lana recognized with a jolt of sickness. Mark, her old supervisor. "The money is clean," Mark was saying, his voice slick and confident. "It's just the accounting. We had a soft spot, a junior pencil pusher, David Chen." "Had?" Fitz's voice asked. "Had," a new voice said. Cold, neutral, professional, the Aegis voice. "The problem was resolved, permanently. The accident was clean." Lana felt the blood drain from her face. She gripped the edge of the counter. "Good," Mark said, sounding relieved. "That just leaves the girl. The admin, Lana Hayes. She's the real problem. She opened her mouth in front of Morelli." "She's next," the Aegis voice said, calm as a weather report. "We have her apartment, her sister's details. She's a ghost. She'll be easy. We'll find her. It will be handled by the end of the week." The recording clicked off. Lana didn't make a sound. She just stood there, staring at the small silver device on the table. It was one thing to be hunted. It was another to hear her own execution being planned so calmly. So, administratively, she'll be easy. "Lana." Dante's voice was sharp. She looked up, but she couldn't see him. Her vision was tunneling. The sounds of the city outside the glass walls faded to a dull roar. David Chen, dead. And she was next. Her sister. They knew about Mia. She broke. It wasn't a sob. It was a complete collapse. Her legs gave out, and she slid to the cold marble floor, her breath coming in short, tearing gasps. The terror was so absolute, so profound. It was paralyzing. She couldn't cry. She couldn't scream. She just shook, her body vibrating with a silent, primal panic. He was there in an instant. He knelt in front of her, his hands on her shoulders, hard and grounding. "Lana, breathe," he commanded. "Look at me." She couldn't. She was staring at the floor, at the image of David Chen's smiling face, at the splintered wood of her apartment door, at the picture of her and Mia. The glass shattered. "They're going to kill me," she whispered, the words raw and broken. "They're going to find Mia. It's my fault. I did this. Oh God, David, stop." His voice was low and fierce. He gripped her jaw, his touch bordering on painful, forcing her to look at him. His black eyes were blazing, not with anger at her, but at them, at the world that had dared to touch her. "They are not finding her," he said, his voice a low, terrifying promise. "And they are not touching you." He pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her like steel bands, crushing her to his chest. He held her head against his shoulder, one hand tangled in her hair, holding her steady as the tremors racked her body. "No one touches you," he whispered, his lips against her hair. "Not while I'm breathing." He held her like that for a long time, on the floor of his cold, beautiful penthouse, just holding her together as she fell apart. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't say it would be okay. He just offered his own solid, unyielding presence as an anchor. When the shaking finally subsided, he lifted her. He carried her to the couch as if she weighed nothing and sat down, settling her in his lap, her face tucked into the curve of his neck. She didn't protest. She was too exhausted. She just clung to the front of his shirt, her body still trembling with aftershocks. They sat in silence as the sun set, the city lights beginning to glitter. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice muffled against his chest. "Don't be," he said, his voice a low rumble beneath her ear. "I've always been easy to overlook. I've spent my whole life trying not to make noise." He was silent, listening. "My parents," she said, the words coming out slow and rusty. "They died in a car crash. A drunk driver. I was 19. Mia was 12. 1 minute, I was a sophomore in college, worried about exams. The next, I was an orphan and a mother." She pulled back just enough to look at him, her eyes raw. "I had to quit school. I got the job at Kensing Croft. I had to pay the rent, raise her, make sure she was okay, make sure she still had a future, even if mine was gone. I learned to be invisible, to keep my head down, because if I made a sound, if I complained, they might notice me, and they might take her away." She let out a shaky breath. "The first time I spoke up, the first time I tried to do something right, was in that boardroom, and now the whole world hears you," he finished for her, his voice rough. She shook her head, leaning it against his shoulder again. "Now I'm just a problem to be erased." Dante was quiet for a long time, his hand stroking her hair in a slow, steady rhythm. The gesture was so uncharacteristically gentle, it made her want to cry again. "You're not invisible, Lana," he said finally, his voice so low she barely heard it. "You're just the only one who doesn't know how bright you burn." He stared past her, his gaze unfocused, seeing something in the glittering darkness of the city. "I had a younger brother," he said, the words costing him. "Paolo. He was 16. He was soft. For our world. He wanted to be like me, but he didn't have the steel for it. He wanted to prove himself." His hand on her hair stilled. "He got in with a rival crew. They were using him to get to me. He thought he was playing them. He called me, said he was in trouble, asked me to meet him at an old warehouse by the river. I was busy. A deal. Something I thought was more important." His voice went flat, empty. "By the time I got there, I was an hour late. They were gone. He was still breathing, but he died in my arms." He looked at me, and he said, "You were late, Dante." Lana lifted her head, her own pain forgotten, and looked at his face. It was carved from stone, a mask of cold grief. He met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw the man behind the mask. He was as broken as she was. "I don't fail twice," he said, his voice thick. She didn't say anything. She just lifted her hand, her fingers trembling, and touched his face. She traced the harsh line of his jaw, her thumb brushing over his lips. He closed his eyes, his own mask cracking, a tremor of pure, human pain running through him. The air in the room changed, the grief and fear, now shared, twisted into something else, a current of pure, raw electricity. It was the tension of the kiss, but 1,000 times stronger, amplified by the baring of their souls. "Dante," she whispered. His name. A question. He opened his eyes. They were black, bottomless and filled with a raw, desperate hunger that mirrored her own. He wasn't the boss. He wasn't the monster. He was just a man who didn't want to fail again. He leaned in, his movement slow, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She met him halfway. The kiss was nothing like the first one. It wasn't angry. It wasn't desperate. It was slow. It was breathless. It was a question, and an answer, and a promise. all in one. His lips were soft, hesitant, exploring hers with a reverence that made her heart ache. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers, his breath unsteady. "Lana," he breathed, as if the name itself hurt him. Her hands were on his chest, splayed flat, feeling the heavy, frantic beat of his heart beneath his shirt. It was racing as fast as hers. "It's okay," she whispered, though she didn't know what she meant. His hand came up to her shirt, his fingers finding the top button. He hesitated, his knuckles brushing her collarbone, his gaze locked on hers, asking for permission. She covered his hand with her own, her message clear. Yes. His breath hitched, with agonizing slowness, his fingers shaking almost imperceptibly. He unfastened the first button and the next. His eyes never left hers, watching her, searching for any sign of fear, but she wasn't afraid, not of him. He unfastened the last button and gently, his touch reverent. He pushed the soft cotton from her shoulders. She shivered as the cool air hit her skin, but his gaze was so intense, so full of a fire she had never seen, that she felt anything but cold. He looked at her, at the soft curves he'd only glimpsed, and his expression was one of awe. He touched her shoulder, his calloused fingertips tracing the line of her collarbone, as if he were memorizing her. He saw the old, faint scar on her shoulder from a childhood fall, the pale blue veins beneath her skin. He saw her. He bent his head, his lips brushing the sensitive skin of her neck, just below her ear. A small, involuntary sound escaped her, and his arms tightened, pulling her flush against him. He worshipped her. He who commanded a city, who broke men with a word, was treating her like she was the only softness he had ever known, like she was glass, like she was salvation. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, her arms around his neck, kissing him deeply, their passion no longer hesitant, but a slow, building fire. He carried her to his bedroom, never breaking the kiss, and laid her on the dark, cool sheets. He stood over her for a long moment, his dark form silhouetted against the glittering city lights, and she saw him, truly saw him, not a boss, not a killer, but a man. And she opened her arms to him. Hours later, Lana lay beside him, tangled in his sheets, his heavy arm draped possessively over her waist. The sky outside the massive windows was no longer black, but a deep, bruised purple, the first hint of dawn. She was quiet, her body thrumming with a new, peaceful energy. Her eyes were wet, but not with tears of fear or sadness. It was relief. It was release. He was watching her, his head propped on his hand, his usual mask of cold control completely gone. In the dim light, his face was open, vulnerable, his dark eyes tracing her features as if he were trying to memorize her. "You don't have to save me, Dante," she whispered, her voice husky. She turned onto her side to face him, placing her hand on his chest, over his heart. He frowned, not understanding. "In that boardroom, when you made them listen," she continued, her voice gaining a quiet strength, "when you looked at me like I was a person, you already did." He stared at her, the truth of her words hitting him. He had thought he was protecting her, but she had, in her own quiet way, been saving him. He didn't know what to say, so he just tightened his arm, pulling her so close she could feel his heartbeat, and buried his face in her hair. The peace was absolute, perfect. It was shattered by the sharp, angry buzz of a phone on the nightstand, not his regular phone, his private one. Dante's entire body tensed. The softness was gone, evaporating in an instant. The boss was back. He grabbed the phone, his voice a low, hard growl. "What?" He listened. Lana watched his face harden, the muscles in his jaw clenching. His eyes went flat and cold. He hung up. "What is it?" Lana asked, already sitting up, clutching the sheet to her chest. He swung his legs out of bed, his back to her, already reaching for his pants. "I was Santo," he said, his voice clipped and void of all emotion. "They just hit Vince. My consigliere blew up his car outside his house." He stood and turned to her, his face a mask of cold fury. "He's alive, but they're done hiding. They're not just cleaning up problems anymore. They're retaliating fast." The cold dawn light in the penthouse felt different. The intimacy of the night had evaporated, replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of impending war. Vince, his consigliere, the man who was practically his uncle, was in a hospital bed with second-degree burns because of her. Dante moved with a lethal, coiled energy, the softness Lana had seen, the vulnerability he'd shown when he spoke of Paolo, was gone. The man who had held her as she slept was gone. In his place was the boss. "They think this is a street fight," he said, his voice flat as he buttoned a crisp, black shirt. He hadn't slept. "They think they can scare me by bombing my club and taking out my men. They're wrong. They're businessmen, Lana, and they're about to learn what a hostile takeover really looks like." "What are you going to do?" she asked, pulling on the jeans and sweater one of his men had delivered for her. Aegis, Harrison, the senator. He ticked them off on his fingers. "They're a corporation, and I'm going to liquidate their assets." He wasn't talking about bullets. Not yet. He walked into his study and picked up the phone. "Get me Celeste," he said to whoever answered. He waited. "Celeste, it's time. I'm sending you the package." "Yes, all of it. The union recordings, the port manifests, the offshore account links. They hit Vince. Burn it all down." He hung up. "Celeste?" Lana asked. "A journalist," Dante said, turning to her. "The only one in this city I trust. She's been investigating Harrison for years, but she could never get inside. We just gave her the key." He gathered the digital recorder from the union boss, a stack of papers from his safe, and a data-encrypted flash drive. "It's not enough," Lana said. Dante paused. "It's everything. It links the firm to the laundering, the port bribes, and the Aegis contract." "It's not," she insisted, her voice stronger than she expected. "It's just paper. It's just numbers. They need to hear a voice. They need to hear my voice." He studied her, his black eyes assessing. She wasn't the trembling girl from the boardroom. She wasn't the defiant, reckless woman from the parking garage. She was someone new. "They'll come after you," he said. "Not just Aegis. The world. They're already coming after me," she replied. "I'm done hiding. I'm done being invisible." A flicker of something, pure, unadulterated pride softened his expression for a fraction of a second. "Santo is setting up a secure laptop in the conference room. Do it." 20 minutes later, she was sitting at a glass table, a small microphone in front of her. Santo stood by the door. Dante leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, watching. She pressed record. "My name is Lana Hayes," she began. Her voice shook. The sound of it, thin and reedy in the silent room, brought back the humiliation of the boardroom, the laughter, the "she's hysterical." She stopped. Dante's voice cut across the room, low and steady. "Look at me. Lana." She lifted her head. His gaze was locked on hers, an anchor. "You told me I already saved you," he said. "Now save yourself." She took a deep breath. She looked back at the microphone. "My name is Lana Hayes," she repeated. And this time, the words were steel. The tremor was still there, a ghost of the fear she'd lived with, but her voice didn't crack. "I was an administrative assistant at Kensington Croft. On the night of November 3rd, I overheard—" She spoke for 15 minutes. She laid out everything, the meeting, the names, the laundering, the cover-up, the death of David Chen, the ransacking of her apartment, the threat against her sister. She finished, her heart pounding, and pressed stop. The file was sent. The war had begun. That night, the city burned. Dante had organized the leak with brutal precision. The journalist, Celeste, released the story at 7 o'clock in the evening, timed perfectly for the nightly news and the first edition print runs. The audio clips of Mark and the Aegis operative planning her termination were the centerpiece. Harrison's world and the world of Senator Graves imploded. But they did not go quietly. The first call came at 9:30. Lana was in the kitchen making coffee, her hands still shaking from the adrenaline of the testimony. Dante was in his study, watching the news reports flood in. It was Santo. "Boss." His voice was tight, strained over the phone. "Il Corvo. They hit the club. Firebombed. The whole front end is gone. No one was inside. We cleared it like you said, but They're not playing." Dante's jaw tightened. "Get our people off the streets. Pull everyone back." He hung up and looked at Lana. "They're desperate." The second call came at 10:15. It was a different line, a burner phone. Dante answered it. He listened. His face, which had been tight with anger, went utterly, terrifyingly blank. "What did you say?" he whispered, a sound more menacing than any shout. He listened again. Lana watched his hand, the one not holding the phone, clench into a fist so tight his knuckles turned white. He hung up without a word and stared at the phone. "Dante?" Lana whispered, terrified by his stillness. "They have Tony," he said, his voice a dead, hollow thing. "My driver, the old man he's been with my father since I was a kid. They have him. What do they want?" Dante turned to look at her, and his eyes were the eyes of a stranger. They were empty. "They tortured him," he said, "and they gave him a message, a simple one. Give her up!" He slammed his fist onto his desk, a single, violent impact that cracked the marble. "They put their hands on my family." He grabbed her arm. "Get your coat. Now." "What? Where are we going?" "They know about this place," he said, pulling her toward the elevator. "They were watching. They let me leak the information. They wanted me to think I was winning. They wanted me to expose them so they could expose me. They're tying me to you, to the leak. They're painting me as a rival syndicate boss trying to muscle in, using you as a pawn. They're discrediting the entire story." The elevator doors opened, "And they just told me that they will kill one of my people every day that I keep you. Get in." The ride was silent, the tension in the elevator a suffocating, physical thing. They took the parking garage, but not in the Maserati. They took a nondescript black truck, Dante at the wheel, driving with a controlled, white-knuckled fury. He drove for 2 hours, north out of the city, into the winding, dark roads of the Catskills. The rain from a few days ago had turned to a wet, heavy snow that was just beginning to stick, the trees skeletal and white in the high beams. They pulled onto an unpaved, unmarked logging road and finally stopped in front of a small, dark house. It was completely off-grid, a hunting cabin, built of dark wood, with a single stone chimney. It was utterly isolated. 2 men stepped out of the shadows, shotguns held at ease. They nodded at Dante. "Boss," one said. "No one gets within 5 miles." Dante ordered. "No radio. No phones. You see anyone, you shoot. Understood?" "Understood." He turned to Lana. The cold air whipped her hair around her face. "You stay here," he said. "They won't find you. You'll be safe." He turned to get back in the truck. "No," Lana said, grabbing his jacket. The terror of being alone, of being left, was worse than the fear of the men hunting her. "No, Dante, you can't. Don't leave me, please." He stopped, his hand on the car door. He looked at her, and the mask of the boss cracked. Just for a second, he looked tired. He looked hunted. "Lana," he said, his voice rough. He took her face in his hands, his palms warm against her frozen skin. "They put their hands on my family. They want a war. I have to go end it. Then take me with you," she begged, tears welling, freezing on her cheeks. "No," he said, his voice firm. "They're using you to cripple me. They're using my people to corner me. I am taking you off the board. I am putting you somewhere I know you are safe. Then I am going to finish this. You'll come back," she whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a plea. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't the passionate, hungry kiss of their night together. It was a hard, desperate kiss. A brand. It tasted of fear and promises and gunpowder. "I told you," he whispered against her lips. "I don't fail twice." He let her go, got in the truck, and was gone, his taillights disappearing into the swirling snow. Lana stood there until the sound of the engine was swallowed by the woods. One of the guards, a man with a face like a stone, gently nudged her. "Inside. Miss, it's cold." The next 3 days were a new kind of hell. The house was clean, Spartan, and silent. The 2 guards, Marco and Petey, were ghosts. They patrolled the perimeter in shifts, never speaking to her, never speaking to each other. The only sound was the crackle of the fireplace and the howl of the wind. There was no television, no internet, no way to know what was happening in the world she had left behind. She had no idea if the leak had worked, if Harrison had been arrested, or if Dante's war had been lost. She had no idea if he was alive. She found a pencil and an old notebook, a hunting log, in a drawer, and she began to draw. She drew the view from the penthouse window, the city lights like a fallen constellation. She drew his hands, the way they had looked on the steering wheel, strong and sure, the knuckles calloused. She tried to draw his face, but his eyes, she couldn't capture them. The coldness that hid the fire, the grief he carried for Paolo. She spent the hours reliving every moment. The first time he'd silenced the room with a look, the way his voice, thick with a sleep he hadn't given into, sounded in the dark as he agreed to stay in his room, the shock of his kiss in the hallway, all anger and desperation, the agonizing, reverent tenderness of his touch when he had finally unbuttoned her shirt, his breath shaking. She was no longer the girl he had saved. She was a woman in love with a man who was, at that very moment, tearing his world apart to keep her safe. The silence of the house became a roar, a vacuum of his absence. On the evening of the third day, she was sitting by the fire, her head in her hands, convinced he was dead, convinced the next face she saw would be an Aegis operative. She heard a car, not the guard's truck, a different engine, the low, powerful rumble of the truck he had driven. She sprinted to the door, ignoring the guard who tried to stop her, and threw it open. The truck skidded to a stop in the mud and snow. The driver's door opened, and he fell out. He didn't step out, he fell, catching himself on the door, his legs buckling. "Dante!" She ran, slipping in the snow, her heart lodged in her throat. He was a wreck. He was alive, but he was barely standing. His face was a map of new bruises. A long, stitched cut over his left eye was still weeping blood. His knuckles were raw and split. His expensive black suit was torn and stained with mud and more blood. Some of it was his. Some, she was sure, was not. He looked up as she ran to him, and a shadow of a smile, a grimace of pure, exhausted relief, crossed his face. "Lana," he breathed. She hit him at a run, her arms wrapping around his neck. He grunted in pain, but his arms came around her, crushing her to him, burying his face in her hair. He was shaking. The invincible, untouchable Dante Morelli was shaking in her arms. "You're alive," she sobbed, kissing his face, his jaw, his throat. "You're alive! You're alive! I told you," he whispered, his voice a raw croak. He pulled back, his bloodied hands cupping her face, and kissed her. It was a kiss of profound, shattering relief. It was the kiss of a man who had walked through hell and found his way back. It was messy and desperate and tasted of blood and winter, and it was the single most beautiful thing she had ever felt. "It's done," he said, his forehead resting against hers. "Harrison, Aegis, the senator. It's done. They're gone. Are you hurt?" she asked, her hands fluttering over his chest, his side, just bruised. He lied, but she could feel the exhaustion rolling off him. He collapsed against her, and together, with one of the guards helping, she got him inside and onto the small sofa in front of the fire. That night, they didn't make love. They just held each other. She lay beside him on the narrow bed, her head on his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. She had cleaned the cut over his eye, her hands gentle. He had winced, but his eyes never left her face, as if he were memorizing her all over again. She was just drifting off to sleep, the first true, safe sleep in weeks, when he went rigid beneath her. "Dante?" she whispered. "Shh," he commanded. His voice was a blade. He was listening. And then she heard it, a sound from downstairs, a soft thud against the wall, and then the unmistakable, quiet, metallic click of a safety being disengaged. Dante was off the bed before she could even take a breath, pulling her with him, shoving her behind him toward the bathroom. "How?" she whispered, her terror instant and absolute. "They must have put a tracker on the truck," he snarled, his eyes sweeping the dark room. He was unarmed. His weapons were downstairs, with his guards. A shot exploded downstairs, a single, muffled cough from a silenced weapon. Then another. Marco and Petey were dead. The bedroom door burst open. Not one man, 3, dressed in black tactical gear, night vision goggles glowing a sickly green. Aegis. Dante shoved her toward the window. Go! Out the window! Run! He didn't run. He attacked. He launched himself at the first man. A roar of pure, primal fury tearing from his throat. It was a brutal, desperate, close-quarters fight. Dante moved with a speed she couldn't believe, a whirlwind of violence. One man went down, a sickening crack echoing in the room. Lana scrambled for the window, but the second man grabbed her, his hand tangling in her hair, yanking her back. She screamed. Dante turned. The third operative, the leader, raised his pistol, aiming it directly at her. No! Dante yelled. He moved. He didn't try to disarm him. He didn't try to attack. He threw himself in front of her, shielding her body with his own, just as the man fired. The sound was deafening in the small room. Dante's body was slammed back against hers, a heavy, dead weight. He made a sound, a short, sharp grunt of pure, surprised agony. He slid down her, collapsing at her feet. The 2 remaining operatives looked at him, then at her. Lana just stared, frozen, at the dark, wet stains spreading across his side. Then she screamed, a raw animal sound of pure, unadulterated horror, tearing her throat, echoing out into the dark. Silent woods. The first sound was a beep, a single, rhythmic, electronic pulse. It was the only sound in a world of fog and pain. Dante Morelli's world was fire. A white-hot poker was buried in his side, and his head felt like it was packed with wet sand. He fought against the drug, the deep, pulling undertow of unconsciousness. He had to get back. He had to get to Lana. His eyes snapped open. The room was dim, the curtains drawn against a gray light that he knew, instinctively, was not the morning he had left. The beep was from a heart monitor beside his bed. The smell was antiseptic and sterile. A hospital. He was not alone. Santo was asleep in a chair against the far wall, his head on his chest, a bandage wrapped around his forearm. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Another of his men, one he didn't recognize, stood at the door, rigid as a statue. This wasn't a public hospital. This was a private wing, bought and secured. He tried to speak, but his throat was raw. He managed a sound, a low groan. It was all it took. From the chair in the corner, the one buried in shadows, her head shot up. Lana, she was a wreck. Her hair was matted, her face pale and stained with tears, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow with exhaustion. She was still wearing the clothes from the cabin, now stained with dirt and his blood. She didn't make a sound. She just moved. She was across the room in a second, her hands hovering over him, afraid to touch, as if he were a ghost. "Dante," she whispered, her voice cracking. He lifted his hand, the one without the intravenous line. It felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He laid it on her arm. His grip was weak, but it was there. A sob tore out of her, a sound of such profound, agonizing relief that it hurt him more than his side. She collapsed onto the edge of the bed, burying her face in the stiff hospital sheets, her shoulders shaking. "You're awake!" she cried, her voice muffled. "Oh, God, you're awake!" "Lana," he rasped. His mind was clearing, the fog burning away, replaced by the urgent, burning need for facts. The house, Aegis, how... She lifted her head, wiping her face, trying to pull herself together. "They're gone. The men who... They're gone. When you were shot, I screamed, 'Santo!' He was your backup. He was already on his way. He heard the shots. He and his men. It was..." She shuddered, her eyes going distant, reliving the horror of the firefight that had erupted after he'd gone down. It was fast. Santo got me out. He got you out. They airlifted us. He processed this. Santo had followed him. Good man. He looked at her. Really looked at her. The dark circles under her eyes, the way her hand trembled as it rested on his. "How long?" he asked. 2 days, she whispered. "You've been in and out. Mostly out. The bullet. It went through. It fractured a rib, tore up your side. You lost a lot of blood." She choked on the words. They said you were lucky." He grunted, the pain flaring as he tried to shift. "They were lucky I was already injured." He looked at her, his gaze intense. Are you? "I'm fine," she said, cutting him off, a hint of the strength she'd found returning. "I'm not the one with a hole in him." He saw her strength, and he saw the lie beneath it. She was terrified. Not of him, not of them. She was terrified of what it felt like to almost lose him. The leak, he said, forcing the words out. "The firm." Lana's expression changed. The fear was replaced by something else. Awe. Disbelief. She reached for the remote control by his bed. "Dante, while you were out, it happened. Celeste. She published everything." She turned on the large flat-screen television mounted on the wall. She didn't turn on the sound. She didn't need to. The images told the entire story. The screen was filled with grainy footage of Harrison, his face purple with rage, being led in handcuffs out of the Kensincroft building. Of Mark, his smirking face gone, now pale and terrified, trying to hide from the cameras as he was pushed into a squad car. The headlines scrolled across the bottom of every channel. City Hall in flames. Senator Graves resigns amid laundering scandal. The Kensing conspiracy. Executives arrested in bribery. Murder for hire plot. Aegis tactical shuttered. FBI raids offices of shadowy ex-military firm. And then, her face. It was a still frame from her testimony. Her sitting in his conference room, her expression serious, her eyes looking directly into the camera. The anchor's voice, though muted, was clearly lauding her. The chyron read, "The KC whistleblower, the woman who brought down an empire." Dante watched the screen for a long, silent minute. He saw the world he operated in, the legitimate world of white-collar crime, burning. He had done it. He had taken an army of mercenaries, a corrupt senator, and a billion-dollar consulting firm, and he had wiped them off the board. He turned his gaze from the television to the woman beside him. She was just watching him, her expression unreadable. He reached out and hit the mute button. The room was plunged back into the quiet of the heart monitor's steady beep. He looked at her, at the woman who had started all of this by simply refusing to be invisible. "Now the world hears you," he said, his voice a low rasp. Lana stared at him, the television, the news reports, the vindication. It was all just noise. She shook her head. A small, certain movement. She moved from the edge of the bed to the chair beside it, pulling it close, and took his hand. Not the one with the IV, but the other one. The one that was bruised and split from the fight. She threaded her fingers through his. "I don't care about the world," she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion that had nothing to do with the news. She lifted his hand and pressed it to her cheek, closing her eyes. "I only care that you lived." Dante stared at her. He had spent his entire life in a world of transactions. Power for favors, money for loyalty, violence for control. He had taken her in to protect an asset, to settle a score. He had fought for her because she was his. But this was something else. This was not a transaction. It was a truth. He had shielded her with his body because the thought of a world without her in it was an impossibility. It was a cold, black void he refused to accept. He had faced death for Paolo, a death he had arrived too late to stop. He had faced it for her, and he had, by some miracle, survived. He was quiet for a long time, just watching her, her cheek pressed to his hand. Santo had quietly re-entered the room, but Dante waved him away. "La Siaci," he ordered. "Leave us." Santo nodded and shut the door, leaving them in the dim, private silence. "Lana," he said, his voice stronger now. She opened her eyes, her gaze meeting his. He shifted, grunting as the fire in his side protested. He ignored it. With his free hand, the one she wasn't holding, he held it out, palm up, in the space between them. It was an offering, a question. "When I was at that cabin, when I saw them raise the gun," he started, his voice rough. "All I could think was that I'd failed, again, that I'd let them get to you, the way I let them get to Paolo. "You didn't," she insisted, her voice fierce. "You saved me. You've been saving me since that first day." "We saved each other," he corrected, his gaze holding hers. "I took a bullet, you. You gave me something to bleed for." She watched his open hand, not understanding. "I don't want you in hiding anymore," he said, the words clear and absolute. "Not in my penthouse, not in a safe house, not behind a wall of my men." He lifted his hand, the gesture simple, but it held the weight of his entire world. "I want you beside me," he said, "in the club, when I rebuild it, in my home, at my table, in my life, always, where I can see you, where you're safe." Lana's breath hitched. This was not a proposal with a ring. This was not a request on one knee. This was a man who lived in a world of absolutes, stating a fact. He was not asking her to be his. He was telling her that she was his, and that he was, in turn, hers. She looked at his open hand, strong, calloused, scarred, the hand of a fighter, the hand that had held her, the hand that had gently unbuttoned her shirt, the hand that had shielded her from a bullet. She didn't say yes. Words were what she had used on the stand, what the news anchors were using on the screen. Words were for the world. What they had was for the silence. Slowly, carefully, mindful of his wounds, she leaned over the bed rail. She put her hand on his chest, feeling the steady, solid beat of his heart beneath her palm, and she kissed him. It was not the desperate, angry kiss of the hallway. It was not the passionate, fiery kiss of his bedroom. It was a kiss of ceiling. It was slow and deep and certain. It was a promise of forevers, of loyalty, of a shared life. It was the softest thing he had ever known. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were shining. She didn't say a word. She just curled her small hand into his open palm. He closed his fingers around hers. It was done. The epilogue was 6 months later. The air in the federal courtroom was hot, thick, and smelled of old wood and anxiety. It was packed. Every seat was taken. The trial of Harrison, Mark and the other Kensincroft executives, was the biggest spectacle the city had seen in decades. Lana sat in the front row, beside Santo. She was no longer the mousy girl in the navy blazer. She wore a simple, elegant dark gray dress, her hair long and loose over her shoulders. She looked calm. Dante was not beside her. He was across the ocean, finalizing a deal, handling the legitimate side of his business that had flourished in the power vacuum he had created. But his presence was everywhere. The simple fact that she sat with his consigliere meant that everyone in the room, the press, the judge, the defendants, knew who she was. She was untouchable. The prosecution calls its final witness, the judge said, Lana Hayes. A murmur went through the crowd. Lana stood. She walked past the defense table, her gaze steady. She didn't look at Harrison, who stared at her with dead, hateful eyes. She didn't look at Mark, who was sweating through his suit, unable to meet her gaze. She walked to the witness stand. She raised her right hand. She took the oath. The prosecutor, a young, ambitious woman, smiled at her. "Miss Hayes, please, in your own words, tell the jury what happened on the night of November 3rd. This was the moment, the callback. The room was silent, holding its breath, waiting for the mousy little whistleblower to speak. Lana looked at the jury. 12 ordinary people. She looked at the judge. She looked at the men who had laughed at her, who had tried to erase her. She took a breath, and she spoke. "Yes," she said. "I was working late on the 44th floor, finalizing expense reports for my supervisor, Mark Iacono." Her voice. It was the most remarkable thing. It was clear. It was steady. It was confident. It didn't waver. It didn't tremble. It didn't crack. She spoke for 2 hours, and her voice never faltered. She held the entire courtroom in the palm of her hand, not with fear, but with the simple, undeniable power of the truth. She was the ghost who had returned to haunt the feast, and this time, everyone heard her. When she finished, there was a long, profound silence. The prosecutor smiled. "No further questions, Your Honor." They walked out of the courthouse an hour later, the verdict a foregone conclusion. Guilty, on all counts. Lana stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun, and the world exploded. It was a circus, a wall of cameras, of microphones, of shouting reporters, all surging toward her. Lana, how does it feel? Miss Hayes, what's next for you? Lana, are you afraid of retaliation from the families? She froze. The sheer volume of the noise, the crushing weight of the attention, hitting her like a physical blow, the old panic, the instinct to become invisible, seized her. And then, he was there. A black town car had glided to the curb. The back door opened, and Dante stepped out. He wasn't supposed to be back for 2 more days. He was magnificent. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored Italian suit, his hair perfectly cut, his face hard and impassive. He looked like a god of the underworld who had just stepped onto the mortal plane. The crowd gasped, a new murmur of Morelli sweeping through them. He didn't look at them. He only looked at her. He walked through the parted sea of press, came to her side, and slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his side. He was her shield, her anchor. He turned his head, and he gave the press the look. It was the same look from the boardroom, the same look that had silenced a room full of laughing executives. It was a look of absolute, cold, undeniable authority. It was a look that promised consequences. The effect was instantaneous. The shouting stopped, not slowly. It stopped as if a switch had been thrown. A reporter who had been shoving a microphone in her face flinched and lowered it. A cameraman physically stepped back. The entire rabid mob of the city press went utterly, completely silent, in the dead quiet. The only sound their footsteps on the stone steps. Dante led her to the car. Santo held the door open. Just before she got in, Lana looked up at him, a slow, awestruck smile spreading across her face. The power of it, the totality of his control, was intoxicating. "How do you do that?" she whispered. Dante leaned in, his lips brushing her ear, the entire world watching, but unable to hear the secret. Only for you. Thank you for listening to this story from Mafia Romance Stories. We hope it captivated you. Where in the world are you listening from? Let us know in the comments if you enjoyed this. Be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for new chapters and new tales every week. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Lana and Dante's journey. Please share them in English.